Hi, my name is Ramesh Laungani. I'm an associate professor at Marist University in the School of Science. Specifically, I'm in the Department of Environmental Science and Policy. And in graduate school, I studied nitrogen and carbon cycling in grasslands. But now at Marist, I work primarily with undergraduates looking at the ecological impacts of biochar, which is a potential solution to climate change and long-term carbon sequestration. So when I think about academic accomplishments, they sort of fall into two buckets. One, I think of sort of standard academic accomplishments in terms of papers and publications. And so one of those would be a publication that I did with my undergraduate research students at my former institution, Doane University, which is a small liberal arts college similar to Marist. That was published in 2016, and my two undergraduate researchers were co-authors with me, and it was all their work, and so I was really proud to see their names on the paper. Another accomplishment that I'm really proud of is the work that I've done with K-12 classrooms, which isn't necessarily published, but in graduate school, I was part of a K-12 program that really made me connect to K-12 classrooms and work closely with K-12 teachers and K-12 students, and I'm still in touch with many of those teachers. When thinking about a challenge in grad school, the thing that first comes to mind is my first field season in graduate school, where I accidentally literally threw out half my data. And because I was studying carbon and nitrogen cycling, I was looking at soil samples and I was looking at rates at which nitrogen was produced in the soil. And unbeknownst to me at the time, I had my soil samples. I needed to extract more data from them, but because I clearly hadn't fully internalized the methodology or what I was really doing in many, in a sense, I literally threw out these soil samples and didn't realize it until I came back after the field season, was trying to analyze the data, and realized that there was a whole column of data that I didn't have. And because the data was now in bags in the garbage, there was no way for me to go back and re-sample those plots until the following field season. So that was one of the biggest challenges because it really forced me to grapple with my own understanding of what I was doing in terms of my graduate research. But it also placed me in a context of asking whether or not I should be doing science at the graduate level. And that is to say nothing of the fact that the procedure that I was carrying out was a rather costly procedure. So there was also a lot of money that I had spent sampling, doing this sampling that I now couldn't actually get the data from. And so it was sort of a lot of burned, lost funding. We had a lab manager who was tied to our lab, who would, do all sorts of chemical analyses for us. And she was an absolute pillar when things went wrong because she was deeply involved in, the data collection process. When I realized I had thrown out half my samples, she was a really, really great sounding board because I could speak with her about both the granularity of what it meant to lose those samples, but also she was really there to sort of very simply say, hey, stuff happens. There's always next field season. Let's figure out how to make sure that you fully understand the protocol and that you're not missing something. The thing that I learned from that failure was I really had to grapple with the idea of how do I collect my data? And that's really sort of immediate. Do I understand fully the protocol that I was carrying out in future field seasons? But also, upon reflection of that, failure, of that mistake, was really saying to myself, and this was part of the support, was saying, okay, I messed up. I can do this, right? If I really dedicate myself to deeply understanding this protocol, deeply understanding the question that I was answering, deeply understanding the methods that I was using in my study, I know I can do this. Because ultimately, while I was missing that data because I threw out my samples, to a certain degree, the fact that I realized my mistake, unfortunately, too late. But when I realized my mistake and sort of came to grips with, oh, here's why that data was so important, here's how that data was missing, it really also buoyed me to say, okay, so I can think about this the correct way. I just need to make sure I get all the details right. The other thing I learned from that lesson was I learned how to be much more efficient in my sampling. So, for example, the first time I did this sampling where I threw out half my samples, it was like a 23-hour day. And by the end of graduate school, when I was doing this protocol correctly, I had gotten a big sampling day down to sort of a reasonable sort of 8-hour day. So not only did I learn the protocol, but I learned how to be more efficient and more effective in my data collection. When I reflect back on graduate school and my role as a graduate student, I really think about, and it took me a while to sort of recognize this, because graduate students are all understandably very, very focused on their particular project, right? Their particular question. And those questions are, as they should be, really specific, right? You're trying to understand a very small slice of the world, but you're trying to understand it really deeply. And so I compare graduate school to sort of looking into this dark cave of the unknown with sort of a pen flashlight. So there's no way for you to see the whole picture all at once. And that's what makes graduate school sort of hard, because you're sort of vacillating between, I have this really specific question that I know sort of how to answer, but I don't know how it all fits into the big picture of nitrogen cycling or climate change or cancer research. The advice that I have for graduate students is, one, recognize that you are asking novel questions, right? And that's an important thing to remember. You don't know the answer, and the reality is nobody else knows the answer to this either, right? Because if we knew the answer, you wouldn't be doing this work. I think it's also really, really important to recognize that in that unknown work, and I did this for myself, when I didn't understand my protocol, so for example, my advisor hadn't done this protocol before. I reached out to the authors of the papers that I was reading and just sort of threw out this idea of like, hey, I'm a grad student. I'm trying to understand this protocol. I'm trying to understand your work. Do you have a moment to chat? And the worst case scenario is you get nothing from those co-authors that you seem to be, reading a lot of their papers. But oftentimes you'll get a response saying, yeah, sure, let's talk about, let's hop on a Zoom call. Let's hop on a phone call. Let's trade emails. And those are the things that allow, I think, graduate students to recognize, and I think it's important for graduate students to recognize that they are part of a community of scientists that they can lean on, right? We cite papers all the time in our work, and that is us relying on the community of scientists, parenthetically, in that regard, to move ourselves forward and ask the next important question. And so similarly, we need to recognize that our immediate community, whether that's our lab, whether that's a lab manager, can be really, really important supports when you are staring into that dark cave and you feel like you are the only person standing in front of that dark unknown. And the fact of the matter is, all graduate students are standing in front of that dark cave, all with their individual pen lights. And we need to have that conversation to say, hey, I'm a little confused, and have other graduate students, have other members of the community sort of say, it's okay to be confused. Let's figure it out together. Thanks so much for watching Failsafe Science. My name is Ramesh, and I hope my story helps you, graduate students, feel more supported, a little less alone, and hopefully helps you understand that you can do this.